data scientist at WaterSmart Software. So we're based in San Francisco. We do customer engagement, utility analytics platform that I'll describe in more detail. So I'll give you just a little background on me. Studied applied econometrics, did some work in energy efficiency consulting for 4 years, so evaluating demand response type programs in Nevada, and then some of the O-Power behavioral response programs. And then, as the drought was intensifying in California, I decided it was a good time to switch into the water field. So we find the data sets are quite similar, metered data, going from kWh to gallons per day. And now I'm heading up research at WaterSmart. So just a brief outline. So what we'll be doing today is a description of the program that we run at each utility, so our engagement program. Then the evaluation methodology that we use to evaluate each implementation to understand customer satisfaction, water savings, all those factors. And then a brief aside that I did just recently was an email subject line analysis. This is just kind of a flavor of the type of data that we have and the types of analyses that we can do. And then we'll look at program level results across each utility. And then the interesting application after that is looking at what I did with a synthetic controls model to try and determine individual household level savings. So going a step beyond just a year-over-year comparison, but trying to create like a aggregated baseline for each household, so we can start to do some aggregations across utilities, and then just some extensions and conclusions from there. Okay, so the program summary. So WaterSmart is a software-based platform. We have a couple different features that allow the utility to monitor their customers' use, engage with them, so messaging tools, detailed information on their past use, any survey information that we've collected, we aggregate that in an easy-to-use platform, constantly iterating. So just a few of our customers, headquarters obviously in San Francisco, and founded in 2009. Just an idea of some of the features that we have now. So we started, with just the basic water report and customer portal. That was in 2011. We moved into, the dashboard analytics for the utility, and then got into leak alerting, just purely notifying people that they had a leak. And you'll see later that we've actually developed a leak resolution flow on top of that, which we found is really effective. The mobile portal, drought goals, a lot of survey integration. What's been popular recently is a group messenger tool. So this allows anyone at the utility to select a specific subgroup of users, based on a given criteria. It could be, heavy irrigators, using more than 300 gallons per day. They can send a customized message to just that group. Or it can also be, a list we generate for them, homes that have not completed a toilet retrofit program, so they could notify them that that's available. And then we're also transitioning into the e-payment space as well, so we can integrate that whole customer experience. So some of the data inputs that we use from the utility, obviously the meter data, we get all the program rebate data, violations, any types of information they have at the household level. So we can inform any recommendation that we make to the customer based on past information. So for us, it would be terrible to recommend, a toilet rebate to a household that has already done that. And that would be, just not useful. And I think at that point, the customer is like, well, this program is not really targeted well to me. I'm going to kind of disengage. So we take a lot of effort to make sure we never do that. And then we append some external data. We take our own survey. We also purchase property assessors data, so lot size, square footage of the home, bedroom So here you're just seeing the dashboard and the customer portal, how those integrate. So we work with different meter types. We have a number of customers with AMI meters, so we have hourly interval data. So there's additional modules that we can offer to the customer based on that. That's the main tool for our leak alerting system. We have different meter types that we're offering the program now too, so it's not just residential. We have multifamily and commercial. So for them, we can send the non-social norms-based water report. And that still has tips for the property, but it doesn't try to compare them to similar types, because you can't compare a hotel to a hotel because there's issues with occupancy differences. So we're not trying to do that yet. Okay, and then some of the things that we've measured. So part of my impact on the company has been enforcing kind of this measure our outcomes and explain what we're doing and have a reasonable process in place to do that. So we have pretty high email open and click rate, so we work pretty hard to keep it that way. So we don't send too many communications out. We make sure the communications are personalized to the user, so we don't abuse that relationship. We try to make sure it's easy to update the profile, that things are apparent for the customer. The types of surveys that we offer are not too long, so we constantly pare down the questions that we're offering to them. And then from that survey information, we see that the customers generally are happy. So we have 87% would like to continue receiving the reports. So they find there's still information coming from them that's useful to them. And then you'll see, I'll show you later, the water savings rate is one of the things we focus on a lot. So that to calculate that, we have a randomized control trial set up and run a regression model for each utility. Another aspect of our program is typically to run it as an opt-out program. So we're pushing engagement to a set number of users within the utilities district. So that's based on the contracted amount. Typically, it'd be most of the utility minus a control group. So we'll start out with print welcome letters and water reports. As soon as we acquire an email for that user, then we can switch them over to digital communications. In some cases, the utility already has emails on file, so we're able to start that route. We go directly by email. The benefit of that is that we can actually do the randomized control trial. With an opt-in program, you're dealing with biases in terms of the number of customers or the types of customers that actually engage with the portal. So it's more difficult to conduct a statistically relevant study. Okay, so here's a look at a welcome letter. So this would be the first information that we receive from WaterSmart. So we would have a utility logo here, not the city water. There would be a link there for the survey, and here as well. So one of the things we focus on is how many people do we estimate is in your household. So I worked on a model for that. It's actually decently accurate, but we'd like to point out that to personalize it, you can easily update that at any time. So we have a number of ways that the customer can do that. We actually even offer one-click surveys on the water report. So if they want to change that occupant value, we make it very easy for them. Because we find that people typically they like the social norms comparison if they feel like it's relevant. So they're in some of the feedback that we receive, they're looking to find a reason why the comparison wouldn't be accurate. And so one of the reasons would be, oh, you're comparing me to homes that have 2 people, but I have 4 people. So we try to steer them in the direction of updating that value. And again, feel free to ask any questions at any time. Yeah?
About the occupancy, because sometimes when you are evaluating the occupancy of a house, you see that there are people that are temporarily living in the house, and sometimes even if you want to answer the question, sometimes you don't know how to answer the questions because some places, like for example, you have your kids that are going to the university,
Sure.
and they come only at the weekends. So,
Yeah.
how do you deal with that kind of stuff? Because we are facing that problem in some of the studies that we are conducting.
We would leave it up to the user to determine what value to put in there. We do get feedback occasionally on intermittent members of the household or other special end uses, and to the extent that we can categorize on behalf of a person or a part-time resident, it's somewhat difficult because you see we bin the properties based on number of occupants, like discrete values, and then these lot size bins for the property. So based on how large the irrigable area is for the property, how much landscape they have. But it's a relevant question. Okay, so after we've conducted the initial welcome letter, so this is the outline for the water report. So here, this person has gotten, we're actually considering getting away from the frowny face, the red drop. So this user is using more than the average household. So they have their bar comparison, as well as the color that's integrated. And so they'll always receive the most relevant 3 water saving recommendations. So these are relative to the time of year. So we would say, if we're heading into the irrigation season, you would want to, potentially, update to native plants. If we had, a turf replacement type program to promote, we would put it there. If we were in the, winter time, it might be, change the irrigation timer to take into account that there's going to be more rainfall in this time. And here we have, 2 modules for the utility to personalize any message that they want to get out. So they work with our, client solutions team to figure out what types of information they want to place in those boxes. Okay, so then into our alerts and notifications. The leak alerting has been, one of our most popular features. So that is either via email or text if we have it on file. And then we'll tell them, the flow rate, how long the leak has been going on, and we direct them to leak resolution flow. And the my use notifications were requested by a lot of the customers. They want to know when they pass a certain threshold. So 3x, my past bill, or 3x my typical usage. Let me know that I've done that. And so that feature we can even turn on without sending out the water reports. So we could, for a large utility, say we're only engaging. Sure, yeah.
I think the tariff is also
So we offer them, an option. So we have a resolution flow. We have an idea of what the most likely leak is, but we don't specifically tell them like this is an irrigation leak, this is a toilet leak. We're building up more data on that, so we might be able to say like, oh, based on this flow rate and this duration, we might be able to tell you, where the leak is most likely. Yeah. We don't do that yet. Again, digital and print delivery, and so we default to print if we don't have an email on file, basically. Okay. So I'll get into some of the methodology that, sure.
Just a quick question, Rana. You have both basically email and snail mail so
Mhm.
far. Are there sort of Facebook messages or Instagrams or whatever you want?
We have
things like that.
a Facebook share feature that people can share their water score. Unfortunately, it hasn't been used quite a bit, but in terms of like sending the information to the user, it's typically just print an email at this point.
Or text. I guess we could text.
Text, we could send like a nudge to log onto the portal, but you're limited in number of characters in terms of what you can send. We do some of the leak alerts via text though. Yeah. Okay, so sample to be spread evenly across 4 different geographies, and then also stratified by print and email. So that was one of our early challenges. We had to create 8 different groups for them. And then, after we've done that assignment, we implement the treatments. That's the welcome letter, the water reports. We turn on, the portal for everyone, turn on the leak alerting, and then we'll monitor the usage and activity with the portal. So what we have is a panel data set. So we have measurements from each customer over time. The evaluation is typically done using the monthly or bi-monthly data. And the model runs best when we have a balance set, so we're not missing any points for given customers. So typically we try to remove those at the outset, so they're not in the sample initially, but they're not used for the evaluation. So a bi-monthly billing utility, each customer would have 6 reads per year. And we can include some time invariant columns in the model as well. So for this, we want to clearly define a start date for the program. So that's been a bit of an issue recently because we have, yeah, sure.
Okay, quick question. I mean, maybe I missed your first couple slides, I started to recover, but do you make a distinction, or do you have plans to try and make a distinction between new and after release?
We do, yeah. I'll get to that a little bit later, yeah. So back to this, yeah, so to clearly define the start date, we have some utilities that don't want us to send all the water reports at once because they feel that it's going to have an undue impact on their, call center. So we're now spacing out the reports potentially over a 3-month period. So we have all these different shipments. So in that case, then you're dealing with kind of a fuzzy start date. So I've had to, tinker with, removing that period of time and working with that in the evaluation. So that some of those do span multiple months. And I also normalize the data from, calendar monthly to a billing period. So, someone may have a read date on the 15th or the 18th of the month. So we want to make sure that we convert everyone to, January 1st to January 30th so we can do the comparison. Typically require, 1 year of pre-programmed data for the baseline period. So this is the only equation I will show today. Just a log transformation of the gallons per day for each user. And then, fixed effects ID. So for each user, we have a fixed effects variable. Beta on the time period, so each month and year that's in the regression. And then, the coefficients of interest here, on treatment and post. So just a binary variable 0, 1 if they're in the treatment group, 0, 1 if they're in the post period. So, the program started and then interacted with the time period, so we know, what period to allocate savings to. And then we look at the standard errors for each of those to determine the significance for a given month. Okay, so here's a look at what we have in terms of average savings across utilities. So the y-axis here is a percent savings, so ranging from 1.5% here to a little over 5%. So on average, we're seeing about 3.3% savings. This is 27 different utilities. Majority of these are in California, so we've expanded more recently into Florida and Massachusetts, but some of those programs are not. We haven't sent up enough reports yet to really do a full year-long evaluation of them yet. So by next year, we'll have hopefully double this set and a much more geographically diverse data set. Sure.
I assume that savings in actual water consumption in gallons or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much roughly does that translate in terms of savings on the utility bills? Because I know that in some places there are fixed costs of infrastructure that they pay and then variable costs. So is it going to save them 1% of their bill or 3.3% of their bill?
I mean, yeah, obviously it would vary quite a bit depending on the utility. I mean, to the extent that they had, tiered rates, and this 3% brought them from tier 3 to tier 2, it could save them quite a bit actually. But if they had just, a high fixed charge and low variable cost, then this may not save them as much.
But over those utilities, you don't have a sense of what the average is, would be lower or higher than that? Just rough ballpark, I'm just curious.
It ought to be low.
Yeah, it would depend, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to drop into, just to give you guys an idea of what we can do with the data that we're collecting. So the subject line analysis, we have a subject line obviously for each email and water report that we're sending out. So we have these, these are all different variables we can put in. So a first name, current month, the current gallons per day. And so by including these, we're trying to personalize the message more. So we find that, if we can get the user to actually open the email, there's a lot more content there, but that's like the first hurdle you have to cross in order to get them engaged. And so these are the top 5 that we have across all utilities.
The top 5 that lead to open rate.
The highest open rate, yes. These are at 67%. And so a couple of those were related to drought messaging in California, so I removed those to give more an idea of what might be applicable across more geographies. So here we have more complicated variables that look at the user's change versus 12 months prior. So these are also effective, and they also have a goal basis. So if the utility has set a target for each of their customers, we can say like, oh, you're on track to meet this goal, and this is what % of that goal that you're at. So anything that we can tie into the subject line that is more personalized and actually incorporates real data, we're finding is very effective. And so at the other end of the spectrum, so these are kind of our lower, less well-performing subject lines. So I think the issue here is that we don't have, besides first name, which you'll see typically in a lot of emails these days, we don't have anything related to the individual's usage. So there's not much that makes it feel personalized to them. So these are not performing nearly as well. And so we'll likely, I only gave this presentation internally about a month ago, but we probably will not be sending too many of these anymore.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Do you know if these are overlapping? In other words, the 65% catch a different group than the 40%, and together they make it 90%? Or the 40%, those that would respond to the 65%? And you just lose it for either way?
I mean, these are, all of these subject lines were sent to a variety of different utilities. So
you haven't tried to check to see whether you're getting different groups by different styles of email. Some people may respond to less personalized ones. That's what I'm trying to.
yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah. No, we haven't looked at that level.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
A couple people have mentioned while we've been here talking about like the influence of your neighbors on changing water. And a few of us were talking. I think you were mentioning yesterday, right? That we never talked about water to our neighbors. And I wonder if these questions are maybe suggesting that people don't really care how they compare their neighbors with respect to water because it just doesn't matter to them.
I think they do. It's just that, something that they're going to read quickly, it needs to incorporate, some data about their household to make them, versus the other 1,000 emails that are in their box to get them to open it. And so if we're not achieving that, then we're kind of failing at the outset. Yeah, but people definitely still, respond to the social norms messaging. So comparison to similar households is pretty effective.
How does time of day when you send the email affect? Or have you looked at that?
Yeah, we've looked at that a little bit. I don't have slides on that. Typically, towards the middle of the day is more effective. So around 12 o'clock we've seen
remind me how frequently you send these messages to your users?
Typically every 2 months.
Every 2 months.
Yeah.
And these messages are not linked to billing information. They are
They
separate.
have the gallons per day, so we've converted, the total volumetric billed amount to a gallons per day.
Sometimes I receive information from my utility that also contains the invoice or the amount I have to pay.
Right.
And clearly I have to read that because then I have to do something on my home banking.
Mhm.
I was wondering if this type of coupled information might increase also the attention that the user gives to these kind
Yeah.
of awareness messages.
Some utilities like to include, bill inserts. We've found those aren't necessarily as effective at getting people to read things, because I know me personally, I would open a bill and then if there's other sheets of paper in there, I may not necessarily engage with those. So we try and time our reports to, as soon as we receive the data, we try to send it out as soon as possible. So it's still fresh in the user's mind and it relates to the bill that they've just paid or are about to pay. But they don't come in the same envelope, or they're not included in the same message. Because the billing systems are typically separate for the utility, so it's a whole different process that we haven't integrated with. So just more of a summary here, if we can have anything that relates to GPD change, we're finding is very effective. And then this worst cluster was kind of very generic subject lines. Those don't perform well. They sound somewhat interesting to this group, but not necessarily to all users, unfortunately. Okay, yeah, I touched on that. All right, so let's look at program level results. So again, just bring us back to this slide. So what we're seeing is, definitely some variation across utilities in terms of the amount of savings. So what I want to get at now is, how do we start to explain, why we see a difference? So it's definitely a complicated question. There's a lot of factors at play. And so some things we can look at the program level. So average lot sizes, evapotranspiration rates, so where the utility is located, and then the registration rates that we see on our portal. So looking first here at registration rates, so we do see, positive correlation between higher registration rates. So that's, ranging from 0 to 40% here on the x-axis. And this is the same, savings percentage, just, grouped into 0.5% increments. So if you can drive higher registration rates, typically you're going to see, higher savings values. And that makes sense because the users are engaging more with the portal. They're more likely to adopt some of the measures, and that we're resonating with them at a higher level.
So sorry.
Sure.
Then the first slide that you showed where there was the report on the average reduction per utility, yes, this one. This is aggregated over all customers, not only those that are using your platform.
Correct.
Okay, so if you restrict to only those that are using your platform, what is the average saving?
So we can't conduct that analysis in the context of a randomized control study because. So I'll get to that a little bit later when I talk about the individual savings level, but we can't do that at the program level without violating the randomization in the control group. Yeah. So next is we're going to look at the influence of the evapotranspiration rate on savings. So we're again seeing a positive relationship here, which makes sense. Regions that are hotter climates, drier climates, they have more, potentially more discretionary water use, and it's easier for them to save than those that are in more wet climates that have maybe only indoor water use. And so here, a 10-point increase in the base evapotranspiration rate is correlating with a 1.14% increase in program savings, which is pretty significant given that the range is, 2 to 5%.
Maybe it can be a bit potentially more efficient for the United regions.
Yeah, but typically we've seen they aren't always necessarily. Yeah, at least in the sample of utilities that we've worked with, people tend to use a lot in those regions.
Each of these dots is a separate utility.
Correct. Yeah. So now we have so portal logins. So my inclination was that, well, if utility has a higher number of logins per month per user, then we typically would expect that they would save more because the customers are more engaged. But actually, we're not seeing really any influence of the number of logins per month on program savings.
So
Sure.
is it a binary thing, like log in yes, no, or do you?
The number of times. So this is a percent of total users. So how many are logging on in a given month?
Are
So yes.
registered users, or?
So they could register at the time they logged in for the first time. So at any point in time, if they haven't registered yet, they're eligible to register.
So is this the percent of registered users that are logged in,
Total-
or the percentage of total users?
Potential of total users, yeah.
That's whether we do it or not.
Right.
Whether they did it 5 times.
So that wouldn't influence it, yeah.
Does that have an effect though? If people who access the portal more frequently, save more water?
I'll get to that, yeah, in the next section.
Okay, so you didn't do the same analysis for the click-through on the emails?
For the-
Instead of 4 logins per month, the percentage of click-throughs on the emails that you're
I look at open rates in a little bit, yeah, but not at click-throughs. Because it kind of varies on the type of content that we offered in that water report. Some may not really have any messaging that's, there may not be anything to click through on. And a lot of times we offer so much content in the email itself that there may not be anything more for the user to find on the portal at that given point in time. So we're working on expanding that content. So to expand this, we're looking at a limited number of implementations, and it's still somewhat difficult to determine what are the causes of the variation in savings across utilities, and we can't include all the variables that we might want to use because I'm still looking just at this program level impact, and so trying to understand differences across programs is not possible. So if we could do household level analysis, we could increase the sample size by roughly 5,000. We'd have, each household has a different savings value at that point. And so the question that I was working at earlier this summer was how can we combine this data across multiple utilities? And so other questions, do all households in the program save a similar amount? Is it a small percentage of households that are driving the overall savings? And so we want to look at all implementations and see what the results are from there. Okay, so what I've done is adapted a synthetic controls model. So this was implemented in R. The first example of use case was actually looking at annual economic growth rates in Spain. So there's different regions. They wanted to know, I think it was based on a minimum wage increase. I think it was in the 80s. They wanted to know, okay, this happened, in one region, but not in the others. But how can we compare, or how can we determine the impact of this one factor? So what you want to do is create this baseline growth rate using the other regions. So you apply a weight to each of them to match the baseline period. So that's essentially what the synthetic controls model does. And so it functions by selecting, a number of matches. So in my use case, it's, we're looking at one household and it's trying to match you know, a number of different households by applying a weight to their load shape and then aggregating those together to get something that matches in the baseline period. And so this is an improvement over a year-over-year comparison. So you could say like, oh, in 2016 versus 2015, this household reduced their usage by 20%, but in the context of a California drought situation, well, everyone reduced by 20%. So it wouldn't be accurate to allocate those savings to our program. We would say, well, we didn't really have any influence at all because everyone changed by that much. But by doing this model, since we're selecting the baseline group from people that are in the same utility, like that 20% will already be incorporated. So we're looking at relative change. So any other exogenous factors would be included in this baseline since it's built up of actual users' data. And so when I first looked at it, I was getting kind of a not a diverse enough user pool. So doing one run, it was maybe giving me 5 or 10 users that were building up the entirety of the baseline. So I split the control group up into 4 different pools. And so now I'm just basically increasing the sample for this baseline by a factor of 4, and then averaging those together. So that idea is that we have one treatment account. We're running the synthetic control match 4 separate times with discrete components of the control pool, and then averaging those together. So just basically a loop on top of the synthetic controls model. Okay, so now that we have that savings, or that baseline calculated, so we can start to answer some interesting questions here. So getting to indoor use, we want to know, do homes with more occupants save more or less? So any inclination from people?
Percentage or absolute?
Let's say absolute, so that would be correct, yeah. So the blue bars, so this is a aggregated load shape for homes with 3 or more occupants versus those with 2 or less occupants. And this is all with verified occupant data that we have from the users. So we're seeing that this is actually a surprise to me because I feel that the more occupants you have in the home, the less kind of discretionary water use that you have. So we've seen a lot of savings relative to outdoor water use, but obviously there's a significant amount in the indoor space as well.
You have one question.
Sure.
Do you have a chance to separate the warm and cold water in your analysis?
So we only have the meter data, obviously. So we could estimate the percentage that's going to a hot water source based on the number of people in that home. But I didn't look at that here.
Just a clarification, so 67 is the 3% savings in a 2-person home. So
this is more, right? So these are this is a group of high savers.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't explain that.
What's the average?
So for this group is averaging 20% savings.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're saving obviously a significant amount, but there is a large discrepancy by these different occupant type households. So that was interesting. Any other questions on this?
Maybe you already said this, I was distracted, but the homes with 3 or more occupants seems like cool homes with 3, 4, 5, 6 occupants. So when I'm just looking at this and saying, okay, with 2 or less occupants, what's the average per occupant? And what's the average per occupant in the other group? Do you have that?
The gallons, GPCD?
It would seem like a cleaner way of breaking up the groups, because if there's 113 and the average is 4.5 occupants in that group versus an average of 1.5, then you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so it's potentially a
Just a brief
lower GPCD. I was focusing on the aggregate gallons, because typically the utility is always interested in the total volume that's saved.
example.
But
Per unit, I want to know per person.
per person,
Was in each of those two groups.
right, so per person, we may be saving, roughly the same, but the households are saving a different amount.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
I have a question.
sure.
Did you at all put out a little bit with more qualitative data in like individual households to understand a little bit more whether they're saving or just looking at quantitative data?
So where they're saving in the household?
Yeah, like if you.
So we have survey information on, what programs they may have completed. But for most of our customers, we don't have the AMI data, so it's very difficult to try and, estimate which exactly, what's the exact reason that they saved. Sure.
You work in eight different states, right?
For what?
You work in 8 different states?
Correct.
You notice any difference
So
among the users?
we don't have enough mature programs in the East Coast states that we're working in, so it's a little difficult. But we do have the one implementation in Florida that's gone past 6 months is already saving 4%, which was interesting. But we'll have to see that play out in Massachusetts as well, where they have, a lot less outdoor irrigation, so potentially less discretionary water use. But we'll see if the indoor savings can make up for that. Yeah. It's an open question. Okay, so then what I wanted to do, this is kind of the holy grail of the whole study, was if I can aggregate, all of these users together. So each N is an individual household. So this is across different utilities. They each have a savings value after our program was implemented with them. So now I'm able to combine those all together, because we're looking at just percentage savings for each customer. So GPD save versus a baseline. Okay, so random model here. I'll go through each of the variables. So we have the average baseline use, so that's just in gallons per day for that customer. Whether or not they register for the portal, so have they ever logged on? Have they interacted with the portal at all? So we see that is really insignificant, or it's overshadowed by other factors. Whether or not they're a power user, so my thinking was that if someone logs onto the portal more often, so 2 or more times, then we'll call them a power user. Would they save more at the household level? So we didn't see as much there either. So this next variable is the average water score. So we give a household a score of 1, 2, or 3. So 1 would be efficient, 2 would be kind of an average household, and then 3 is inefficient, or take action score. So this is saying that if you move from 2 to 3, you're actually saving 9 gallons per day less. So those that are in the highest score bucket are not saving as much as those that are in the lower buckets. This program count is a record of the programs that they participated in with the utility. So any other rebate programs, do they have a habit of participating in conservation programs? So that's slightly positive, and that would be most users have only participated in 1 or 2 programs. And then this derived irrigable area was actually insignificant. So I thought that homes that had larger lots or more irrigable area would be likely to save more, but it turns out that's not a factor that we're seeing right now. Whether or not we have an email on file for them, so this is just binary variable 0 or 1. So that ends up being negative, but I think there's a couple other factors: the open rate and the count of water reports that are interacting with that. this is a water report count in print, so the number of print water reports that this household received. So for each additional water report that we're sending them, they're saving roughly 0.76 gallons per day per report that we send out, holding constant all other factors. And then for each email water report, we're seeing that they're saving 1.18 gallons per day. So the email reports seem to be a little bit more effective than the print reports. And one of the big factors here is this open rate. So this is an average open rate for the customer. So we have information on whether or not they read our emails. So if they go, 0 obviously would be they never read any of our emails, to a 1, meaning they read all of them, they would save an additional 7 gallons per day. So it's a pretty large impact, which empirically makes sense. If they're actually reading our content, they're more likely to be saving. The age of the home, while significant, it's really not a large impact. So you have to increase home age by 20 years to get a 1 gallon per day impact. Whether or not they own the property, so we have information on that. They can either tell us in the survey that they're property owners, or we know from the utility that they own the property or their names on the deed match that we do in the property lookup. So that was actually a decently strong result. So almost 4 gallons per day, significant at the P equals 0.01 level. And that also makes sense. If you own the property, you're more likely to take the actions that we recommend to you. You're more likely to invest to save water. Then it has a pool, so that's whether they have a pool in the property. That's significant, but slightly negative, so they're likely to save 1 less gallon per day if they have a pool. Sure.
So for us, the baseline is negatively correlated. Is it because it is confounded with an average water score, or why is that?
I wouldn't read too much into that. I just wanted to control somewhat for what their usage level was. But you would have to change the baseline by 100 gallons per day in order to get a 1 gallon per day change.
But I mean, in all other programs, baseline is the most significant predictor of savings. When you look at O-Power programs, when you look at our stuff, I mean, it's always positively correlated. So I'm
Right.
surprised. I think it might be confounded with the water score, actually.
Well, so maybe it is that there's something going on within the baseline. So, yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that, maybe some of these factors are correlated with higher usage. Yeah, for sure.
And another question, I mean, you have publicly available party records in the US, right? Did you check if Democrats or Republicans respond differently?
Good question. I didn't look at that in this analysis, but that's not something that we typically purchase in our data feeds, but that would be interesting.
Because I know for electricity, some people did those on their phones.
Right. Right. So my thought is always that I want to use information that we can, potentially use to predict, future consumption or future behavior for these households. So it's interesting to get survey information, from a subset of users, but my thought is always that, well, I'm only going to be able to apply that to the 10 or 15% in the future that I get that information from. So I need to somehow, link that back to, a property characteristic or, a usage profile in order to make it useful. Yeah. David?
I think this is cool because it's just a very detailed way of looking at what are the behaviors or effective behaviors or factors of effective behaviors. And at the same time, because it's so detailed, I'm wondering the email, the WR count email, and the open rate, those are all correlated at some level. You can only open an email if you actually have an email account on the
I can go through the individual regressions. I didn't want to put that all on one slide, kind of, adding these incrementally. And I can include that we can put up on the website. Yeah, there wasn't, the open rate did hold up, regardless of whether I had these, water report counts or email in there. And those were one of the bigger impacts.
I was curious about your evaporation zone, your geographic differences. I wonder if you considered doing the analysis across zip codes, because zip codes, so much data is already available about the characteristics of people who live in various zip codes.
Yeah.
That could get at, for example, party affiliation, it could get at age, it could get at income, it could get at a lot of different things.
Yeah, we have to think of how to, characterize, different zip codes in a way that we could include in the model. So maybe, a couple different zip code clusters or something like that.
Well, if you've got address data, you can go down to the block level or census tract level.
Right.
Which is
Just taking that and then deciding like what variables we want to include in the model from there. And so this is definitely an open question. If anyone has insight on what else we can put in here, I'm happy to also share this data if people would like to work with it. We're always open to doing that. So the last thing I didn't get to is the peak ratio. So that was calculated by the high bill amount versus the low bill amount. So the idea being that this user potentially has a large irrigation spike, and so that does have an influence. So that ratio averages 3.5 in the sample, and some users go as high as 5 or 10. So they have 1,000 gallons per day in June, and then only 100 gallons per day in January, something like that. So that does have an influence on savings. And that one I like because it's purely based off the usage profile, and so then we can start to predict what this household's going to do purely off their data.
So can you estimate if there's different levels of engagement that a customer has, whether they get emails from the utility, whether they are registered and look? Can you estimate essentially the water use elasticity of those activities, those levels of engagement? And then if the utility is basically saying, here's how much per gallon we're willing to pay to reduce use, you could almost do a cost effectiveness analysis to see, well, how much of a discount do you want to have for people that will register for use versus blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that would be interesting for sure. I think we could definitely propose something like that to them in terms of like which groups they target. And my thought is that maybe that we can start to understand which households aren't responding. Do we have a way? I think some of this open rate, I think we get sometimes stale emails from the utility. So what I'd like to do is, if they haven't opened 3, 4 water reports, we'll start to assume that the email is not valid, and we'll revert them to print and see if we can, get a new email for that household. Yeah, because a lot of times emails come through, maybe it was a rebate program or a billing system that's 2, 3 years old.
So you're all using these data to help to target different messages to different segments?
This data,
Or these kind of data?
not particularly. So most of the targeted messaging is based on, the property characteristics, the usage profile, or the survey data that we collect. So it's more around, what measures can we recommend to that household? If we know that they have 0 irrigable area, we're not going to recommend, a turf replacement program or any landscaping recommendations at all.
Leads me to another question. I'm thinking, do you know for sure that all 27 utilities don't have other programs in place to educate their consumers? Are you the exclusive contact on this subject with the customers?
No, we're not. Yeah, they absolutely do. They have a wide varying number of programs in
Are
place.
you trying to control for that? Because I'm wondering if that would confound
It's possible, but we do randomize, given that's in place, right? So if it's a large enough
Take
sample.
out some of it, but it could be there are systematic differences if they have more effective or less effective or no programs. It might be a category you can look at quickly to see.
Yeah, so it did include, at the household level, like, number of programs that they participated in. So we know, have they done 1, 2, 3, 5 programs, over, a varying length of time. So for some utilities, they'll send us historical program data going back 10 years. Some will only send a couple of years, something like that. But to the extent that a home has already completed a number of programs, there may be less for them to save potentially. Yeah. But one thought I had as an extension is to start to evaluate the utility rebate programs using this kind of a model. So if we can say, okay, everyone who participated in this turf replacement program, we just sum up the savings from the individual household level and just use a different start date. We can start to have kind of an automated evaluation tool for the utility on their dashboard, so they understand how each program is performing. Yeah. So yeah, just my last section here on extensions and conclusions. So what I was just saying there is if we could evaluate these rebate programs that typically aren't structured as randomized control trials, but using this individual baseline, we could start to calculate what everyone has saved relative to that program, and then sum it up and compare that to what we might expect based on an engineering calculation. So identify these customers who are not saving after completing an efficiency measure. So it could be that people substitute, they have a more efficient shower head now, but they're not saving water. So what's going on in that household? Are they taking longer showers? Did a number of occupants change? Something like that. So that would be interesting to know. And what percentage are not saving what we expect. Yeah, and then maybe try and brainstorm some new covariates that might explain the difference in these savings outcomes. And of course, we're always happy to share data with anyone that's interested. We can give aggregates across different utilities, individual anonymized data from